Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I know, I'll come closer. Let's scooch closer. So this morning I kind of started by sharing my why. I was really inspired. Later today we're going to hear from a brave woman talking about revolutionary love. And after watching that and hearing Charles's beautiful music this morning, I thought, let's get personal. And so you've got big corporate titles, you've got big jobs in the world, but what's your personal why? I'd love to hear just from you about what's your why for the work you do?
Sure. First of all, thanks to the SIS team for having me here. It's been incredible to be a partner. I think we all sort of leave here inspired, but what's really fun is what we get to do when after we leave here, right? The action we put into place. So my personal why, we were just talking about this a little bit. I feel like sometimes what draws us to the work is different than what sort of sustains us and keeps us doing this work, and it kind of evolves all the time. So when I think about my personal story, so my parents met in the Vietnam War. My dad was from Chicago, so that's where I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Was fortunate to have both of my parents from my childhood. Very supportive. My mom was Vietnamese and my dad's African American. And we were, by any statistic, poor in a zip code that would say there was never any chance for my sister and I to be successful, but none of that was my reality. And so while those are the exact people I target through much of the work that I've done, at no point did I ever feel lucky or disadvantaged or any of the terms that people use to describe people today. I just felt like I got some great opportunities. I had some great people get behind me, and I made it here, and more people should be able to make it here. There's nothing special about me, and I never thought so then. And then, again, you meet so many people who don't have all those opportunities, and you realize something is definitely wrong with that. So I always kind of wanted to be in a position where I could help with that, and I didn't know what that would look like. And for much of my career, I was a banker. I never thought that would be my day job, so to speak. So I'm fortunate to be an opportunity where I can bring both of those together. But it's so funny, when I meet people, they would assume that I would have never been in that space, would never understand that space. And to your point about people who are often looked to for solutions are people who have no idea what the actual problem is like, and people who never even ask people what the problem is like. And so some people just assume that someone not being in your shoes, like, oh God, like, oh my, I can't believe, how do they do that? Well, people do it every single day. And I think we need to honor and respect that and just bring those people closer to our work.
That's good. Thank you. Lata, what about yourself?
Sure. First, thank you for having me here, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. So similarly, right, my why was born out of my personal experience and my personal story. I'm the child of immigrants from India. Both of my parents were born and raised there and grew up poor in a rural part of the country. And I just recall from a very early age, right, being very aware of how fortunate I was to have the parents I had who had this set of opportunities, right, that they had and could avail themselves of, that propelled my family within one generation into a totally different, right, stratosphere from the rest of my family. And so many others in terms of our financial well-being, our financial security. And I was reminded of a story the other day where, as a young adult, I went to my parents and I said, why didn't you ever teach me about table etiquette? And you can imagine the scenario, right? You get invited to these fancy dinners, you're at the table, and there are endless pieces of silverware and glassware and napkins on every side. And to this day, I'm sort of confounded, right, about where I start. But when I asked them the question, they said, well, because we didn't have a table, right? We grew up sitting on the floor eating with our hand. And I knew that, right? I'd been to their homes, but their childhood homes, but it was a reminder, and there are constant reminders, right, throughout my life of, again, how fortunate I was. And so all of those moments helped me to crystallize my purpose. And I think about it as leveling the playing field, right? Equity, and making sure that everybody has the same opportunity or set of opportunities that they can avail themselves of and have the agency in their lives to make good choices, right, for themselves and for their families.
Thank you all for sharing your whys and getting a little personal this morning. I invite all of you all to get a little personal over the next 2 days and have these conversations. You all both have very big jobs, but you've also been in the field of social good, impact, purpose for a really long time. So I'd love to understand, starting with you, Lata, like the evolution that you've seen in purpose in your work.
Yeah, I refer to it as a little bit of back to the future. So when we think about
Yes.
right, the original charter of business, it was to drive progress. And then we kind of get into the era, if you fast forward, of shareholder supremacy, where it was all about maximizing value for our shareholders. And now we're at this point of, you mentioned profit with purpose, right? And this notion that we have a broader group of stakeholders, our shareholders for sure, but that we need to create value for a lot more people, right? People with diverse expectations, different expectations. And so, that happened. And I think there's also simultaneous to that, right? The recognition of business leaders that if we're really in it for the long term, right? We're constantly now getting asked about what's your long-term strategy. And we say that we're not about, right, the quarterly, we're constrained by this quarterly reporting, construct, but that we're really thinking about long-term value creation. Well, if we really mean that, right, then we've got to be thinking about societal issues because they are inevitably going to intersect with our business, right, and our ability to be a long-term, viable, sustainable, right, profitable entity. And so for Prudential, by example, right, one of the issues we've been engaged with over a long period of time is opportunity youth, right? Young people who are disconnected from work, formal work, and from education. And so really pleased to say that we recently made an announcement that we are going to commit $180 million to support opportunity youth globally. And And that's because, again, we see that, right, as an issue that is going to impact our business now and going forward. And so it's something that we need to be concerned about and address.
It's fantastic. If you all haven't looked it out, check out the Opportunity Youth announcement and the work they're doing. It's really, really important, impactful work. So it's really exciting, the work you all are doing. So,
I think there have been lots of positive evolution in this space. I think what was once a side function that was nice to have is now imperative. I think also just the voice of the employee is much stronger than it used to be. I think, in the past 10 years, there's definitely recognition that the customer is important, right? Just as important as the shareholder. But at the end of the day, the data is still conflicting in terms of, customers believe they would choose a better brand. But at the end of the day, we've seen it time and time again that when a company hasn't necessarily been at its best, people will continue to choose that product and be a purchaser of that product. But employees, right, as a company, employees, you're sort of living and breathing that every day. If you can't get people to work and stand behind that mission and believe in it, there's a different authenticity issue. So whether it's the Edelman Trust Survey or any informal and formal surveys, you're seeing that employees becoming so important, whether it's from a recruitment perspective, everybody talks about the war on talent, future of work, it's war for talent, future of work, et cetera. But I think at the end of the day, the employee voice is so much stronger. And, many of us started with sort of a top-down approach. Sort of how do we think about the issues we want to get behind? And I think there's a lot more dialogue and conversation with employees about what that looks like. Making sure that, again, there's a place of authenticity, because if your employees don't believe it and they're sort of the easiest people to convince at the end of the day, neither will, no one else will either. And so I think that Comcast, that's really how our CSR work has built and evolved. And I think we're making sure that employees have a voice in that work.
Yeah, no, definitely. I kind of think of it as like 4 stages. Maybe the most cynical is you're doing social good to counter a latent negative in your brand. So you are the alcohol company and you say, we care about mothers against drunk driving because we care. The next is really around the image of like, we're doing this because we want to look good, brand reputation, which is really important. That employee engagement tier, I think, is like working from the inside out is really important. The millennials and Gen Z did service and did volunteering in high school, in college, and they don't care if they're a data scientist or a neurosurgeon, they want to do social good in their job. And with the war on talent, like you said, competing for that is so critical.
Absolutely. I mean, 40% of our employee base is millennials. Yeah. And just a few short years, 50% of the entire workforce will be millennials. And so I think we just have to figure out, so how are we engaging them in the work?
And I think the biggest challenge, and I want to hear what you all find as the biggest challenges in this work of purpose, is integrating, I think social innovation at the heart of it is really having your product fuel social good. And so like at Hewlett-Packard, we did this thing where we took the technology to identify counterfeit ink and use it to identify counterfeit antiretroviral drugs. and it was the same technology, but it was using it for good. But tell me, like, what are some of the challenges you all are facing in doing this work?
Yeah, I can start. I mean,
Please.
Dalila just referred to it, right? And it's this
Yes.
notion of authenticity. And I think helping leaders, right, in particular, find their authentic voice and be able to tell their stories, whether it's the personal sharing, right, or just tell things in a way that resonate with our associates, because they really, right, want to see that. And this purpose work won't work if, right, we don't bring our true selves, our authentic selves to the work. I think another challenge is sort of how you find critical mass at the middle, I'll say, right? Because I think, you know, our mainline employees are totally bought into this notion of purpose, and it's so motivating, right, to be connected to this larger, the North Star. And I think senior leaders tend to be too, but for very practical reasons and understandable reasons. There are a lot of folks, right, who are charged with hitting the numbers and the P&L responsibility, and sometimes see purpose as being outside of, right, what they're doing. So helping people connect the dots and understand that purpose is actually going to drive, right, what they're doing and help them be successful in what they're doing. So I think that's another sort of challenge that we're seeing. And then lastly, I think for companies as large as ours, right, the ones we represent, there can be a little bit of a left-hand, right-hand thing, right? That as you're leaning into purpose, it's, you know, not so unusual for it to be the case that some place in the company there might be something that's happening that's not necessarily congruent with that purpose. And so how do you get your arms around that and make sure you have a view to the whole?
Yeah, I do think, you know, that challenge is real. I mean, you mentioned these 4 stages. At any point in time, you're going to have somebody in the company in any one of those 4 stages, and then maybe someone who's not even thinking of, oh, I didn't really realize we had a CSR strategy, or I didn't really realize that we did that, and it's constant education. I also think philanthropy is, you know, it's one of those areas where everybody thinks they can be an expert pretty quickly. And right, it's a professional discipline. Right, like I'm a people person, you know, and I volunteered, you know, once last year at my church. I could totally do this job.
Or I went to school. I know
Right.
what it's like to do education.
Exactly.
Grant making.
I have a friend who was a grant maker. Like it doesn't work that way. So the education takes place at all different levels. Like one, there's a way to drive real impact, right? Using what makes us great as a business and changing that lens into social good. And once you have real tangible examples to prove that, you can start to bring people along. But you need those real examples. It's not enough to say, oh, we can do this. Like you got to have a tangible example. I mean, one of our most innovative features on our platform is our voice remote. So that is through our X1 platform, through Xfinity, and originally it was just, you know, an exciting feature to have that many people are excited about. But when our accessibility team got in there, tested it with many of our partners that serve people with disabilities, we realized how life-changing that simple feature could be. And of course, all of us benefit as well, right? No different than sidewalk cuts or many of the other initiatives that many people are fighting for. You know, if you really are focused on the population that is, you know, underserved at the end of the day, that chances are you're going to benefit everybody. But you have to get points on the board to bring people along. So I think that education is constant. When we have employees serving on boards, do they really understand the issues that they're trying to impact? And how do we really close that gap? And it can be difficult to channel that passion. It's all good energy. And we all want to be able to leverage it. Right. But just because you are excited about focusing on homelessness doesn't mean that we should unleash you to figure out some new app that's going to cure homelessness. Chances are that's not going to happen. So I think
there's not an app for that? No? All right, go.
Well, I'm guessing there's an app for it, but I'm also guessing it doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, until it's designed by somebody who's experienced homelessness, it's not going to work.
But but that's a real issue, right? Everybody wanting this immediacy. Yeah. And, you know, it's not like the solution for homelessness was sort of derived 20 years ago and we just haven't deployed it. These are hard issues. And just because you have new energy doesn't mean we can solve it overnight. Doesn't mean that we should be less frustrated or there shouldn't be the urgency. But I do want more people to take more time to understand the interventions that have been in place, you know, and how these work and how we could think together about new technologies and new ways to solve these issues.
There's wisdom here. I love this. All right. No, thank you. I think a few years ago, somebody said to me, you know, before meeting you, I never really knew that like this was a profession. And I thought, I guess that's a compliment. I don't know. Like, is it? Again, like, is it? I think it's becoming more of a profession, which is a good thing.
Absolutely.
But I'm just curious. With the time we have left, just talk about the future of kind of where you see this all going. I shared some remarks that about like where I think it's going. I'd love to hear from you all about where you all see the future of purpose at work.
Yeah, I mean, I see it continuing, right, and deepening. I think in uncertain times, right, call for clarity of purpose. And again, we've heard our associates want to see it, our investors want to see it, all of our stakeholders, right, want to understand what we're about, what we stand for. And so certainly with the generational shifts in leadership that will continue to, right, occur, given what we know, the data shows around, again, younger folks and what they want to see, what they expect from businesses, I think we'll see more companies leaning into purpose and doing it in a way that's not right marketing, that is truly about having a worldview and committing to that worldview through good times and bad.
I mean, I think what's interesting is, companies that start today, whether it's a startup or a larger company, really put purpose earlier in their evolution agenda, right? Which is very different for a company that's 200 years old or 50 plus years old like mine. And I think that's an interesting way and a different way to think about it that engages people. But at the end of the day, if you think about where we are as a country and just really all over the world, I mean, we're just seeing levels of frustration that we haven't seen before. And, in many ways, with all of the progress that we've made as a country, people who were having great lives were very sheltered from what the majority of the country is dealing with. And that sort of bubble doesn't exist in the same way as it does. And so I do think, you mentioned, companies sort of responding to some negative aspect. I mean, some of the biggest CSR interventions have been born out of that. And in some ways, I feel like we're a little bit in that place right now. The frustration level is high, the inequity is high. Philanthropy is really sort of questioning and rethinking how we define equity, right? In some ways, philanthropy can be a very elitist industry. Right, so it's a professional discipline, but like, let's be clear, all of us are not experts in the best ways to solve all these issues, and so we need to bring other voices in. So I do think redefining that dynamic and the different power and collective voice that really wasn't possible, outside of major protests in a way that they were, 50 years ago. I'm definitely excited and hoping that will lead to the type of change we need to see. And I feel like we're just before that's happening.
No, I know we could have a whole conference just with these two amazing, amazing women. I do think there's a future of that participatory grant making, of shifting who is making the choices for sure. We could talk all day, but we don't have much more time. So if you all could join me just in thanking these amazing women for the amazing work that they do.
Thank you.
We're grateful. So yes, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.